So, Ash, you actually got to go hands-on with the upcoming mobile title Pokémon Masters for about 45 minutes, I believe, and even got to take part in a group interview with the creators to talk a little bit more about it. So I wanted to have you on here and pick your brain to see what we can expect from Pokémon Masters, as people are extremely curious about this, mainly because, hey, we got all these cool trainers coming back. And yeah, I'm curious what you thought of your time with the game.
Well, I think that's definitely the main draw here, for returning fans at least, is the fact that for the first time ever, really, you've got this cross-generational approach where you've got, trainers from one generation interacting with trainers from every other generation. And I think for returning fans, that's going to be the main draw here, because the gameplay is very much, to me at least, geared toward new players, or at least non-hardcore Pokemon players, because while it's different from the core Pokemon games, it's also been kind of simplified in terms of type weaknesses and stuff, so I think if you're a hardcore Pokemon fan, you might like the battle system, and I think it could be very fun, but I think you're really going to be coming for all the interactions between these characters who canonically have never met before, and I can say just from my 45 minutes playing the game, 45-ish, that you get a lot of that. Like, every trainer that you get has limited voice acting, so they all have their own voice actor, actress, and they do directly talk to each other in a lot of instances. So if you've ever wondered what Cynthia might say to, like, Misty, well, perhaps you'll get to find out in Pokemon Masters here. So I think that's a pretty cool conceit.
Yeah, it definitely sounds engaging in that way, and it kind of reminds me, just with that description, of Fire Emblem Heroes a little bit, because Heroes is definitely not as complex as a regular Fire Emblem game, but it has the ideas there enough that you can still enjoy it and enjoy the characters coming in. They have those story moments where they have interactions between these other characters, so a lot of what you're saying is kind of just reminding me of that.
Yeah, it's similar to Fire Emblem Heroes in that sense, but it's also slightly different, because I would say Fire Emblem Heroes is a pared down, simplified version of the core Fire Emblem gameplay. There are differences, but it's very clearly based on that core Fire Emblem formula, whereas Pokemon Masters, yes, some of the mechanics have been simplified, like type weaknesses. For example, all of your opponents now only have one weakness, as opposed to dual types, dual weaknesses. You only have to worry about one weakness. However, the core gameplay is nothing like the core Pokemon series. It's 3 versus 3, real-time battles, which means not turn-based, and not 1v1 Pokemon battles as we've become accustomed to. So it is simplified in certain ways, but it's also, the base gameplay is completely different from what you might be used to, from what you're definitely used to, if you've played all the core Pokemon games.
Yeah. So tell us what it really means when it's real-time combat. Is it something like, more like a Final Fantasy where there's a time gauge, or is it just like Pokemon Go where you're just beating on each other as quick as possible?
It's almost like, it's actually kind of almost like an active time battle gauge, actually. So what's interesting is that you can select moves and use them anytime you want, and they play out in real time. You select your target in real time, one of the 3 Pokemon that you are facing. Again, it's 3v3. And I say Pokemon, but really I should say sync pairs, because this game is based on the concept of sync pairs. And a sync pair is defined as a Pokemon and their trainer. So you're never fighting just Pokemon. You have 3 sync pairs, and you're fighting 3 other sync pairs. And so basically, you select moves in real time. You also have trainer actions, like using an item, like a potion to heal your Pokemon, or some sort of stat buff. And these all happen in real time. However, you're limited by, I can't remember the official name for it, but it might be called the sync gauge or the action gauge. But basically, there's a bar at the bottom of the screen that fills steadily. And each notch that fills gives you an action, and some moves require 2 bars, or 2 notches, or 3 notches. So in that sense, it's almost a little bit like Final Fantasy 13 of all things, because basically you're waiting for the bar to fill to be able to use these attacks in real time. And there are various things you can do to make the bar fill faster, and that's kind of where things got a little confusing for me. I will say, it's funny, even though this game does seem like it's geared toward newcomers in the sense that it isn't based on the core turn-based gameplay of the main series, the screen very quickly gets filled up with chaos in this game. Like, it can be really overwhelming and kind of hard to keep track of all the different mechanics that are in play at once. And in that sense, it kind of reminded me of the first time I saw Xenoblade Chronicles 2's battle system, just because in that demo too, I was dropped into the middle of the game with no context or knowledge for how the battle system worked. And so this isn't that complex, obviously, but when you start playing, you'll quickly find out that stuff starts happening, and you're like, whoa, okay, I've got these sync moves, charging up, and there's like a whole mechanic where if you can land 3 moves with all your Pokemon, or all your sync pairs, I should say, in a row without getting damaged, then you can do like a super move I think it's called a sync move. But basically, there are ways to synergize your sync pairs in order to build off of one another, and then relay different attacks, and then team up into this ultimate sync attack that does crazy damage to the opposing team.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. And how often were you, I'm trying to imagine the setup for this. Is it just kind of like Dr. Mario World, where you hit a node and you get the next bit, or is it story based? How is it structured with going into each of these battles?
It's very much story based, and it actually reminds me of Fire Emblem Heroes in the way that it's set up. Basically, you have different chapters that are listed, and then within those chapters you have different, mini stories that just go in order. And what's funny is that some of those, mini chapters can just be cutscenes. I played a few that are literally just cutscenes. There are some mini chapters that are not battles, that you just have a couple of NPCs talk to each other that move the story along, but then that's it. So it's basically like Fire Emblem Heroes, although I think, if I remember correctly, every single scenario in Fire Emblem Heroes culminates in a battle, and this is not the case in Pokémon Masters. So, some will have battles, some will not, but they all move the story along. And story is actually something that I was told was a focus for them in this game, which is unusual for Pokemon. But basically, it takes place on this island called Paseo Island. I wasn't quite clear on the pronunciation. And basically, their approach to this is that it takes place, quote unquote, somewhere in the Pokemon world, that brings all these people together. They're not committing too much to making it canon or not, but they're basically saying, this is all stuff that could be happening in the world of Pokemon in this place that was previously, undiscovered, Paseo Island, right? So it is all the characters but whether it's kind of like an alternate universe type thing or part of the overall canon, they're kind of leaving up to your imagination, really.
Which is fine.
Which is completely fine. I mean, basically, this is kind of like a game like Project Cross Zone, right? Where the whole point is to get these different characters from different games to cross over and interact with one another.
And how are the models? They look pretty good from the trailer, but how do these characters look and sound?
They look great. I was actually really impressed with the visuals across the board. Everything now, assuming you're playing on a phone or a tablet that is powerful enough, everything's super smooth. It might even be, I think it's 60 frames per second actually on the higher end phone I played on. They actually had me play on a higher end Android phone as well as a lower end Android tablet, and I will say that the differences were like night and day. If you're going to try to play this game on lower end hardware, you're going to see the difference. When I played on the lower end tablet, it was a lot choppier. Things were definitely an inconsistent frame rate. It'll work in previous, or I should say, older models of phones and tablets, but the performance is very different. So you'll want to play this game on a newer piece of hardware if you're able to.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
But the art was great, the models were great. Yeah, I mean, and the music, I don't really remember the music too much. It's mobile Pokemon. It sounds like Pokemon, but it's not necessarily anything that I might compare to the main series.
Right. That makes sense. Did they talk at all about the monetization aspect? What can we expect as far as what they're going to be asking us for is to get these new trainers or whatever items they might have within the game?
So what's cool about this is that monetization is surprisingly limited. They're taking a surprisingly conservative approach to this, wherein the only monetization that happens in the entire game is getting new sync pairs. Now, of course, that's the big draw, right? It's like pulling from a banner in Fire Emblem Heroes, where you have your favorite heroes that you might get, but you have to obviously, deal with the really low % chances. And that's basically how Pokemon's monetized, is that you can get new sync pairs by spending the premium currency that you can also buy with real world money. Now, that premium currency can also be earned in game, exactly like Fire Emblem Heroes' orbs, so you aren't forced to spend money. But if you want to acquire a lot of new sync pairs quickly, let's say you have like 3 of your fan favorite trainers available and you just want to get them all, then chances are you're going to have to spend some money to get them. However, what I do like about this approach is that all the in-game mechanics, such as leveling up your Pokemon, teaching your Pokemon new moves, that's all handled with in-game currency that you cannot buy. So you don't have to, you don't have to money hack the game in order to get strong Pokemon. That's all done by you playing the game and building up your Pokemon yourself. So in that sense, it actually is, that part at least, is kind of like the traditional Pokemon games where you build up your party all within the game itself. So don't worry about getting into a situation where you have to pay money to buff up your Pokemon, because they assured me that monetization is limited to acquiring new sync pairs.
Very cool. I mean, it makes sense. As you said, that is kind of the main draw. Did they indicate at all about how many trainers are going to be there at the outset, or?
They did not. They were very coy on who was going to be available to start, and they did give us a hint of I think it was a separate form of Brock called the Sigma Suit Brock. If it was Brock, I can't quite remember, but basically these are the first variant sync pairs that you're gonna be able to get. So it's kind of like one OG Lucina versus Spring Break Lucina in Fire Emblem Heroes, or Bathing Suit Lucina, where you have regular Brock, but you also have Brock in what's called a Sigma Suit, and he has a different Pokemon for his sync pair than regular Brock does. So there are going to be variants, and they are going to try to get you there, obviously. But their approach to monetization, what they explained to me and in our group interview, is that they are mindful of the target audience of this game, which obviously is kids. So they don't want to be too aggressive. They think there's a line that shouldn't be crossed when you're marketing your game primarily to kids. So they didn't want to take an overly aggressive monetization approach, because again, the game's audience is children, essentially.
Right. And I mean, that's good to see, and hopefully it handles that well. But yeah, I'm imagining a lot of variants, and it's basically being handled in the way I thought. It was like a slightly different Brock with different Pokemon, slightly different Misty with a different Pokemon. It's exactly how I thought this would be handled, which, I mean, makes sense if you're going to do a game like this.
Exactly.
Now, in addition to that, we have seen through the trailers that there is co-op where you can join up with other players in order to offer up your own sync pairs. Did you get to experience that at all?
I did. And what was funny about the demo I played was that basically all the sync pairs I had access to were woefully underleveled for the opponents they were making me fight. So me and the DNA reps that were playing with me, we lost our co-op battles. It was me and 2 DNA reps, and we lost because the sync pairs we had access to just were not up to snuff for the part of the game they were having me play. So I unfortunately didn't get a really good sense for what it feels like to dominate a co-op match and really be in control of everything that's going on. But I will say that one of our matches came down to the very last hit on the very last Pokemon, or sync pair, I should say. And that was, it got really exciting. It got very, we were all like, oh my god, are we going to make it? And it was really close, and that was exciting. And what's interesting about co-op is that instead of it being essentially 3v3, it still is 3v3, but you're actually, all 3 of your, you and both of your teammates all have 3 sync pairs. So it's actually 3x3, and it's in the sense that basically, throughout the entire battle, you're going to be going through 9 sync pairs between your opponents and yourselves. And so that does make battles a lot longer, and it makes them a lot more strategic in the sense that you have to swap out your sync pairs relative to the weaknesses, the type weaknesses of your opponents. And it gets, like I said, very hectic very quickly. There is I would say, somewhat of a high learning curve, although I want to qualify that with the fact that I didn't get to take a tutorial. Again, I was dropped right into the middle of it. So I can only assume that if you're playing from the beginning, all these different mechanics that seem really chaotic later on are introduced to you one at a time.
Now, is there any PvP with this? We've seen co-op, but is there PvP where you have like you and 2 friends taking on somebody, or your team of 3 taking on another team of 3?
So unfortunately, there is not. They decided to forego PvP because their intent with this game, that I was told in our interview, and just kind of the concept, is teamwork. They wanted to really kind of push that bond element of having a sync pair, your trainer and your Pokemon, and you link up with other friends to take on other teams. They really wanted to push that team bonding aspect with Pokemon Masters, which is why they consciously decided to go to not include PvP. However, I did specifically ask them, will we be able to pair up, and do co-op with friends, or is it going to be random only? Because Nintendo's track record there isn't always the best. Not that this is core Nintendo, but fortunately I was assured that yes, you have a friends list, you can pick friends from your friends list to do co-op with, and you can do random matchups with like random allies, but you don't have to.
Okay, that's definitely good. So, what else beyond the story did you see in the game? Like, is it just focused on story mode and pulling from these new sync pairs, or is there some other aspect that you can like manage and handle?
I didn't notice that there were any other major aspects that there were to manage, but there is the main Paseo Island area that you can explore. And it's not that you have full 3D, free movement. It's basically kind of like a point-and-click adventure game where, you select certain people to talk to, and then you automatically move there, like Phoenix Wright or something like that. Otherwise, it really is, you can acquire new sync pairs, you can use the currency you get from battles to level up your Pokemon, teach them new moves. So I got the sense that was the main, the main gameplay loop. You go into battles, you do story battles, you get stuff to level up your Pokemon with. And in between battles, you manage your team, and of course, there's also training areas. There are kind of like I think it's the Tower of Training, or the Training Tower in Fire Emblem Heroes, where you can take on different levels of practice CPU battles to just buff up, to level up your team, get extra currency to spend on leveling up and teaching new moves and such like that. So there are going to be events as well. So of course, this is a mobile game. It's a game as a service. Continuing on, and there are going to be, of course, special banner events where you can get exclusive sync pairs, special battle events and things like, community events. So they said that there's going to be that stuff, and there was one other thing. What was it? I can't remember, but there was one other element that I'm forgetting about at the moment that they are going to be including in kind of the lifespan of the game going forward. So, this is very much a, just look at Fire Emblem Heroes as the general...
Look at that,
blueprint.
Transfer it to Pokemon.
Essentially, again, with the allowing for the fact that the core gameplay here is way different from the mainline Pokemon games.
Right. Well, is there any other aspects of Pokemon Masters that you wanted to mention?
I think just overall, I would say that there is a lot to be excited for here. I think if you're a returning fan, it may not be exactly what you're looking for gameplay-wise, and it may be. I think this is definitely going to resonate with a certain part of the Pokemon community. But I think the main draw for longtime fans here is the crossover element of seeing all your favorite trainers from different generations interact with one another. Otherwise, I think this is going to be really well positioned for newcomers, and I was told explicitly that they are targeting newcomers and casual players with this game in terms of the mechanics, because it requires no foreknowledge of the mainline Pokemon games or how they operate. You don't have to come into it with the type weaknesses and strengths memorized. It's all been very simplified there, and so I think that's going to be good in terms of positioning it for newcomers. But otherwise, you do have that crossover element that I think is really going to appeal to fans, and I think it's good that they're taking a conservative approach with the monetization, given that the game's audience is mainly kids. I will say that they also told me in the interview that Pokemon Go has nothing to do with what they're doing. They did not look to Pokemon Go for inspiration or ideas or anything at all like that. They were very clear to me that the two are very separate. They're not meant to be, inspired by one another in that sense. Now, they didn't rule out the possibility of having, collaboration events with Pokemon Go, but the two are very separate, and you shouldn't go into this game with any expectation of having your Pokemon Go experience really matter in the least. And I guess the one other thing I should say is that there is a new evil team that factors into this story called Team Break, and they have pretty cool designs, but they wouldn't DNA would not tell me what role they play in the story necessarily, other than being the new evil team, which basically tells you all you need to know.
Yeah. Exactly. I mean, they're kind of crazy if they're going up against all these masters, so...
Right, exactly. I also did ask about, with Pokemon Sword and Shield coming out in November, I did ask if they may be doing some crossover events, introducing sync pairs from the Galar region, and, what do you think they told me? We have nothing to comment on at that time, at this time we can't say, but, you can assume that they're going to.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if their crossover thing with Pokemon Go was taking the trainers from that and popping it into this game.
Right, exactly. And they said that when selecting sync pairs, character popularity was key. However, that was not the only consideration, because if you only go with character popularity, then you're going to have the same trainers in Pokemon over and over, right? So character popularity is definitely a factor when selecting sync pairs and in terms of the order they're rolling them out. But you can also expect to see some unexpected pairs and unexpected characters pop back up. I also did ask if there's any plans for the game to come to Nintendo Switch in light of Pokemon Quest beginning as a mobile game and then being moved over to Switch, and they actually made a good point. I expected them to be, give me the usual "we have nothing to announce at this time" answer, but they actually gave me a really straightforward, obvious answer, and that is the fact that if you've seen footage of the game, the sync pair, the battles are vertically oriented like smartphones are. The Switch is horizontally oriented, so actually when they gave me that answer, I'm like, oh, actually, how would this game work on Switch? So, unlike Pokemon Quest, I really think there's very, very small chance that this is going to come to the Switch. So, if you have any interest in this game, don't wait. I don't see it coming to the Switch.
I mean, it's free to start, so it makes sense.
Exactly. So, I think that's pretty much everything. I guess the one other thing is that they went with 3v3 real-time battles because of the co-op element, actually, and they reasoned that it would not be very fun for co-op players if you had to do a turn-based format where each player is waiting on the other player to select their moves and take their turn. It isn't, it doesn't really foster a fast-paced, actiony, collaborative environment where all three members are working together. So that's actually the main reason they went with real-time battles.
Very cool.
Yeah, and I think that's pretty much everything that I can think of for now.
Well, I'm definitely interested in checking it out. We still don't have a release date as of yet, but when that does hit, I'll definitely probably pick it up, because I got to see how my luck goes and whether it can keep my attention, unlike Fire Emblem Heroes, which did not give me much luck.
You know what? Oh, thank you for saying Fire Emblem. I just remember the other thing they're going to be doing as part of ongoing events. There are basically side stories that are focused on each different trainer, focused on developing their character, and they're basically the same thing as paralogs, right?
Nice.
They're this game's stand-in for paralogs in Fire Emblem Heroes. So if you have a fan-favorite trainer, look forward to scenarios that are, or at least one scenario that is completely focused on that trainer. Even though they're pretty short, it's not like you're going to get anything really in-depth.
Yeah.
But I played one, and it was like, a few minutes.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, so that's everything. I promise I'm trying to get everything I can in there, but that is everything that I can recall at the moment about my Pokemon Masters demo.
All right, well, I think that covers it for our Pokemon Masters preview, so thank you for watching, and if you liked this video, be sure to like us on Facebook and Twitter at GameXplain, and of course make sure to subscribe to GameXplain for more on Pokemon and other things gaming as well. Until next time, bye.